One inmate inside this prison participated in the deadliest terror attack in the United States before 9/11. Another was a doctor whose patients kept mysteriously dying under his care. And another ordered the firebombing of a family home from behind bars to silence a witness. This prison is ADX Florence. Hidden deep within the Colorado mountains, ADX Florence is considered the most secure prison in the United States. Often referred to as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, this federal supermax was built to house the inmates considered too dangerous, violent, or high risk for ordinary prisons. Terrorists, cartel leaders, serial killers, and mass murderers have all been locked behind these walls. Many spend nearly every hour of every day in complete isolation. Today, we're taking a look at some of the most dangerous and notorious inmates currently held inside America's most feared prison, some of whom will never walk free again. So far, we've only covered UK prisons, so let me know if you enjoy this video and would like to see more prisons from overseas. This first inmate carried out an attack that turned one of America's biggest sporting events into complete chaos within seconds. This is the case of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. On the 15th of April 2013, thousands of people lined the streets near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. Families and spectators packed tightly behind metal barriers, celebrating as runners crossed the line. But hidden amongst the crowds were two brothers, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and his brother Tamerlan Tsarnaev. Just seconds before the attack, the brothers spoke on the phone. At 2:49 p.m, Tamerlan detonated the first bomb outside Marathon Sports on Boylston Street. As smoke and panic immediately spread through the crowd, people instinctively turned towards the first explosion. And according to investigators, that distraction gave Dzhokhar the opportunity he needed. He calmly walked away from a black backpack that he had already placed at the barrier in front of the Forum restaurant. Just seconds later, the second bomb exploded. The devices had been built using pressure cookers packed with low explosive powder and metal shrapnel, designed to shred flesh, shatter bones, and cause maximum suffering. 29-year-old Crystal Campbell was killed in the first explosion, and the second killed 23-year-old student Lindsay Liu and 8-year-old Martin Richard. More than 260 others were also injured in the blasts, with many losing limbs, including Martin's 6-year-old sister. Following the bombing, Dzhokhar appeared to continue with life as normal. The very next day, he attended college classes, went to the gym with friends, and even posted online, describing himself as a stress-free kind of guy. Then 3 days later, on the 18th of April, authorities released images of the suspects. That same night, the brothers fled, armed with more homemade bombs, a handgun, ammunition, a machete, and a hunting knife. At around 10:25 p.m, they ambushed and murdered 27-year-old campus police officer Sean Collier, shooting him multiple times at close range inside his patrol car. Shortly afterwards, they carjacked another man named Dun Meng and forced him to drive them around before stealing $800 from his bank account. Dun eventually managed to escape and contact police, allowing authorities to track the vehicle using its GPS system. The brothers were finally located in Watertown in Massachusetts, where a violent standoff with police began in the early hours of the 19th of April. During the shootout, Tamerlan exchanged gunfire with the officers until he reportedly ran out of ammunition, which is when he was tackled by police. But moments later, Dzhokhar got behind the wheel of the stolen vehicle and drove directly towards the officers. He narrowly missed them, but instead struck his own brother, dragging him around 30 feet down the road before escaping. Tamerlan later died from his injuries. Dzhokhar abandoned the vehicle, destroyed his phones, and hid inside a boat in a residential backyard while an enormous manhunt unfolded across the city. The following day, the owner of the boat noticed a loose tarp and blood on the boat. Inside, He spotted a body curled up and immediately contacted authorities. When police closed in, they discovered messages written by Dzhokhar inside the boat, including, "The US government is killing our innocent civilians," and "Stop killing our innocent people, and we will stop." The investigators later found that the brothers had studied Al-Qaeda propaganda material and bomb-making instructions. During his trial, Dzhokhar's defense argued that his older brother had been the mastermind behind the attack and had heavily influenced him into participating. In 2015, Dzhokhar was sentenced to death, although that sentence was temporarily overturned in 2020 over concerns regarding jury screening, but the death penalty was reinstated in 2022, meaning Dzhokhar Tsarnaev remains on federal death row inside ADX Florence. This next inmate was trusted to save lives, but whenever he worked, patients kept mysteriously dying. Co-workers suddenly became violently ill, and investigators would later discover handwritten recipes for poisons hidden inside his home. This is the case of Michael Swango. Authorities believe Michael may have started killing while still training as a medical student. In February 1984, a nursing student reported seeing Michael tampering with an IV shortly before a patient suddenly suffered a seizure and respiratory arrest. The patient survived, but nurses on the ward became increasingly suspicious. Several patients had already died while under Michael's care, and some staff privately believed he may have been connected to at least 5 deaths. Hospital leaders carried out interviews, but ultimately dismissed the concerns. Among staff, though, Michael earned a disturbing nickname of 00 Swango, a reference to being licensed to kill. Despite the suspicions surrounding him, Michael continued working in medicine, and later that same year, in July 1984, he got a job as a paramedic. But once again, strange incidents followed him. Co-workers became mysteriously ill after drinking coffee he had prepared or eating food that he had brought into work. Investigators eventually concluded that he had been poisoning colleagues using an arsenic-based ant poison. When authorities searched his home, they discovered what was described as a miniature poison laboratory. Inside were chemicals, poisons, and handwritten recipes for ricin, botulism, and supersaturated cyanide. But even after all of this, Michael somehow continued finding work. In 1991, he changed his name to Daniel J. Adams. Then in March 1992, using forged documents, he secured a medical residency position in South Dakota. Once again, the pattern appeared to repeat itself. Healthy patients began unexpectedly deteriorating and dying. Eventually, staff uncovered Michael's real identity and past allegations, leading to him being fired. But even then, he managed to obtain another position elsewhere as a psychiatric resident using forged documents, only for his history to catch up with him yet again. By 1994, there was a warrant out for his arrest on fraud charges. Instead of facing authorities, Michael fled the United States entirely and travelled to Zimbabwe, where he secured work at a hospital. And once again, patients reportedly began dying under mysterious circumstances. As suspicion grew around him, Michael fled yet again before the investigation could finally catch up to him. Then, in June 1997, he was hired by another hospital, this time in Saudi Arabia. But while briefly returning to Chicago, he was arrested at the airport on fraud charges. He later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. But during that sentence, the FBI were building a much bigger case against him. In July 2000, just days before he was due to be released, Michael was charged in connection with the deaths of 3 patients from 1993, after investigators exhumed bodies and discovered evidence of poisoning. Authorities also uncovered a diary in which Michael reportedly described the pleasure he got from killing. Among these 3 victims was 73-year-old Thomas Samarco, who prosecutors said was given a lethal injection. 60-year-old George Ciano, who was injected with a toxic substance, while Michael falsely claimed he had a "do not resuscitate" order, and 62-year-old Aldo Serini, who was also allegedly killed using a lethal injection. Then, just 1 month later, Michael also pleaded guilty to the murder of 19-year-old Cynthia McGee, patient recovering from a car accident. Prosecutors said he injected her with a lethal dose of potassium before falsely recording her death as heart failure. Investigators later revealed that Michael agreed to plead guilty partly because he feared extradition to Zimbabwe, where authorities accused him of poisoning 7 patients, 5 of whom died, a case that would have exposed him to the death penalty. To this day, there is no confirmed total number of victims linked to Michael Swango, but investigators and medical experts believe he may have been responsible for as many as 60 deaths across multiple hospitals and even multiple countries. Authorities also discovered that Michael kept newspaper clippings of crimes and deaths, creating what was described as a scrapbook collection. And even people close to him were not immune from suspicion. His former fiancée, Kristen Kinney, later died by suicide after suffering a mysterious and severe illness, one that some investigators believed may have involved Michael poisoning her as well. In September 2000, Michael Swango pleaded guilty and received 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. This next inmate was already sitting inside a jail cell when prosecutors say he ordered one of the deadliest witness retaliation attacks in modern American history. This is the case of Kaboni Savage. By 2004, Kaboni was already behind bars, awaiting trial on federal drug trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering charges connected to a large cocaine operation in Philadelphia. Prison didn't stop him from continuing to control violence on the outside. While incarcerated, Kaboni learned that one of his close associates, Eugene Coleman, had also been arrested and was allegedly willing to cooperate with authorities. That instantly made Eugene's family targets. At around 5 a.m. on the 9th of October 2004, a home in Philadelphia was firebombed. Investigators said that the fire began in the living room before rapidly spreading throughout the property. Firefighters managed to extinguish the blaze after around 20 minutes, but by then, nobody inside had survived. 6 people were killed, including 4 children. Among the victims were Eugene Coleman's mother, Marcella Coleman, Eugene's 15-month-old son, Demir Jenkins, and 3 other children related to Eugene, as well as one of their mothers. Even the family's pit bull died in the fire. The attack had been orchestrated from prison by Kaboni himself. Authorities said he contacted his sister, Kidada Savage, who then helped organise the attack by recruiting hitman Lamont Lewis and showing him where the family lived. Lamont also recruited his cousin to help carry out the murders. And investigators later argued this wasn't the first time that Kaboni had used extreme violence to silence witnesses. Back in 1998, a man named Kenneth Lassiter was shot and killed after reportedly bumping Kaboni's car during a parking dispute. Kaboni was later acquitted of the murder, but only after the lead witness in the case, Tobias Flowers, was also murdered before trial. Prosecutors suspected Kaboni had also ordered that killing. Authorities additionally linked Kaboni to the murder of rival drug dealer Carlton Brown and several other men connected to Philadelphia's drug trade. Prosecutors described Kaboni as someone who ruled through intimidation, violence, and fear, ordering murders from both the streets and from behind bars. In June 2013, Kaboni Savage was sentenced to death. He received 13 death sentences in total, including 1 for witness intimidation and 1 for each murder he is known to have committed. But in 2024, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without parole by President Joe Biden. This next inmate came dangerously close to blowing up a passenger plane over the Atlantic Ocean using explosives hidden inside his shoes. This is the case of Richard Reid. On the 22nd of December 2001, American Airlines Flight 63 was travelling from Paris to Miami with more than 180 people on board. But during that flight, cabin crew noticed a strange disturbance involving one passenger, Richard Reid. Flight attendants later reported smelling what they believed was a burning match. One attendant saw Richard place a match into his mouth before alerting the captain. When she returned moments later, she saw him attempting to light yet another match, but what she noticed he was trying to ignite was concerning. According to the flight attendant, Richard appeared to be trying to ignite the tongue of his trainer, and protruding from the shoe was a visible wire. When she attempted to stop him, Richard shoved her to the floor. Another flight attendant then tried to intervene, but Richard bit her thumb during the struggle. As panic spread through the cabin, the first attendant returned carrying water and threw it over Richard in an attempt to stop whatever he was doing. Passengers quickly rushed to help restrain him, pinning him down for the remainder of the diverted flight, while doctors on board injected him with sedatives. The plane was eventually diverted safely to Boston, and once investigators examined Richard's shoes, they discovered just how serious the situation had actually been. Hidden inside both of his trainers were homemade explosive devices containing TATP and PETN. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the actual names, but they're on the screen if you're interested. These were highly volatile explosives that at the time were extremely difficult to detect using airport screening technology. Investigators later believed that Richard may have failed to detonate the device because his shoes had become damp. His original flight had been delayed, forcing him to wear the shoes for much longer than expected, and obviously creating more sweat, making ignition more difficult. PETN itself is also notoriously hard to ignite. Authorities later discovered that Richard had allegedly planned the attack with an accomplice, although the other individual reportedly backed out at the last moment. Investigators also uncovered evidence showing Richard had become radicalized years earlier. During a previous prison sentence, he converted to Islam, just as his father did while he was incarcerated. By 1998, investigators said that Richard had embraced violent extremism and spent the following years attending training camps in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Authorities also believe that the idea for the shoe bomb itself came months before the attack. During a flight to Israel in July 2001, Richard reportedly noticed that airport security didn't inspect inside passengers' shoes. After his arrest, Richard openly admitted his motivations, telling the court, "I'm at war with your country." The incident immediately changed airport security around the world. Following the attempted bombing, passengers were now required to remove their shoes during airport screening. He later pleaded guilty to 8 terrorism-related charges and was sentenced to 3 life terms, plus an additional 110 years without the possibility of parole. This next inmate helped carry out the deadliest attack in the United States before 9/11. This is the case of Terry Nichols. At 9:02 a.m. on the 19th of April 1995, a massive explosion ripped through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The blast destroyed a huge section of the building, collapsing floors and trapping victims beneath concrete and debris. In total, 168 people were killed, including 19 children, while more than 500 others were injured. For years, it remained the deadliest terror attack ever carried out on American soil until the 9/11 attacks in 2001. Although Timothy McVeigh became the face most associated with the bombing, Prosecutors said that Terry Nichols played a major role behind the scenes. The two men had met years earlier during a brief period serving in the US Army and remained close afterwards. According to investigators, the pair spent around 6 months carefully planning the attack. On the 22nd of September 1994, they began renting a storage shed where they gathered materials for the bomb. Around the same time, Terry stole dynamite and blasting caps from a local quarry, supplies that prosecutors later said were used during the attack preparations. Authorities also discovered the pair had planted a getaway vehicle just days before the bombing itself. The bomb they eventually constructed was enormous. Hidden inside a rented truck was more than 2 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer mixed with fuel oil, a devastating explosive combination capable of causing catastrophic destruction. Although Terry was reportedly hundreds of miles away when the bomb detonated, prosecutors argued he had played a critical role in helping acquire materials, organise logistics, and prepare the attack alongside Timothy. Just 2 days after the bombing, on the 21st of April, Terry learned that authorities wanted to question him, so he voluntarily surrendered himself to police. The investigation that followed shocked the entire country, not only because of the scale of destruction, but because the attack had been carried out by American extremists, rather than a foreign terror organisation, which many initially suspected. During the trials, Timothy McVeigh received the death penalty and was executed in 2001. Terry, however, avoided execution. Although prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, the jury could not unanimously agree to sentence him to death, a legal requirement in Oklahoma. Instead, Terry Nichols was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Those were just some of the most dangerous and notorious inmates currently held inside ADX Florence. Let me know if you'd like to see more prison coverage from overseas, and if there are any other prisons or specific inmates you think I should cover next.